If you watched my recent video about that bunch of tulwars that are really in rough shape and I'm planning to clean up, well, that phase has started, of course. I'm not sure if I already posted other videos about the cleaning. However, if you're not up to date, the crash course is that I have a bunch of tulwars and a few other Indian subcontinent swords, which are in very, very rough shape. The plan is to restore these using a bunch of different methods and kind of then hopefully have some insights into what works best, how different methods maybe interact with each other, and these kinds of insights, hopefully. So I'm going to be using the typical autosol and the sponge, which is the staple of the channel. I'm using Renaissance decorroder, which is a dedicated chelation agent. I'll probably be trying some homebrew chelation methods as well. So one of them, which has been actually pointed out by one of you in the comments, is using molasses and water, which apparently molasses does have a chelating ability. There are other methods as well. I may even end up trying evaporust. However, beyond chelation, there are more mechanical methods that can be used. So I normally use a sponge and autosol, which is a light polishing compound. But what you can also use is a brass brush or very fine steel wool. These both will not scratch. I mean, of course, it's best if you always test it on a corner of the blade first, but in theory, they will not scratch or damage your sword, and they can help mechanically remove a bunch of oxidation or rust. And today we're going to try this method on this. This is one of the two tulwars with the knuckle bow, so the one that had the loose blade. This is why it's off, and this makes it really easy to clean. I already did a couple of runs of chelation on it, so using the decorroder, and it seems to have worked pretty well to take away the bulk of the grime. But as you can probably see here, the blade is still heavily oxidized. So I've been trying to use the sponge and the brush here towards the tang, and you can probably see with what seems to be decent results. So the steel is shining through. And what we're going to do in this video is try and apply it to all of the sword and see what happens. I'm honestly fairly optimistic, but also don't know really what to expect, so we'll kind of discover together. So, time to test some new cleaning implements. We're going to look at the steel wool pad. This is very fine steel mesh. And then we're going to look at the brass brush. So none of these will cause damage, or should cause damage. It's still always good to test. So I tested here on this section of the blade, and you'll see that there seems to be no sign of scouring or damage. The rest of the blade, we'll take a look at it really quickly here. It's oxidized and has still some rust, so it'll be a good idea to clean it up. These are just marks from my oily hands, like oily from oil. I've been cleaning swords today, so let's start. I'll work down this way. So let's start. I'll work down the blade, so along the blade, and on this side first. We'll get a little bit of oil onto the steel wool here. That will maybe help. And then we'll start cleaning. And depending on how this goes, I may speed up the video and kind of just show you like a sped up version, because it might take a bunch of time. I'm not sure. Okay, let's take a quick break. You'll see the sponge is holding up, the wool here is holding up pretty well. You'll see a bunch of dirt, so something is definitely coming off and happening. The feeling is quite different from the sponge. It feels way more smooth from the get-go, but perhaps that's because the blade is already smooth in itself. And now we'll wipe off the... We'll now wipe off the oil and see if and what results we can spot. We might wipe the table too, because it's in pretty bad shape. So, we do have splotches of steel starting to show. So it definitely does work. It's doing something. The results may actually be more clear live than on camera, see if I can get an angle where you see it, but I think this is the best area to see it. The whole blade is kind of like this, so you'll see these areas where you start seeing the steel show through. So, promising results. We'll now try to pair it with the brass brush and see what kind of difference this makes. Okay, let's see if there are any changes after using the brass brush. Not seeing anything too crazy, but it's covered with oil and grime, so I can't really tell. So we'll just keep at it. I'll get some oil on the blade. Maybe that helps. And then we can continue with the brush. The sponge is, I think, saturated now. We'll quickly wipe the blade down and see what's up. We are definitely getting somewhere. You see, the areas of steel are now way more evident and clear. They run kind of all up the blade. I have the impression, though, that perhaps working on small segments at a time may be best. This is the part I had done earlier, and it seems like maybe like this, you're able to focus more work in one spot and actually make it more efficient. I think by doing long strokes, you end up maybe losing part of the energy. But let's just compare it to the other side just to see if we're actually seeing results. Yeah, the other side is completely patinated. You can see there's really no steel shining through. So certainly some results, I would say. Anyway, I'll keep working. So by focusing on a smaller section, you can see actually, I think I would say that the efficiency per calorie seems to be better when working on a small section. You can see kind of that, well, compared to this section of the blade, there's way more improvement. The only danger with working in small sections is that you risk either crossing over onto sections you already polished and end up having like sections that are differentially cleaned. This is not so much an issue on this blade, I think, because, well, it's not in the best shape in terms of conditions, so we're not risking to, move on to really polish a section that's already clean, but it's something that you need to be mindful of. So I'm not sure it's my favorite approach. It takes more or less a few minutes on each section to get state. So of course, if you wanted to completely polish it, it would require quite a bit more time. But let's say probably, I would say that to get to this stage, with half an hour work, you should be able to do one side of the blade, more or less. What I'm going to test now is also switching pressure. I've been putting a lot of weight onto the sponge here and kind of digging in as much as I can, but it's possible that being a superficial layer, you don't need to really press so much. So of course, in economy of energy, we'll try and apply less pressure. So more or less, we're looking at this section now. Certainly, dirt is on the hand. That's good news. Better on the hand than on the blade. But let's see what happens to the blade. So, not the biggest amount of difference here. I did kind of then move up the whole blade, so maybe I went against what I was talking about. You'll see up to here, it seems really well cleaned. We did, however, forget the brass brush, so we'll apply that a little bit as well. And it appears like it may be actually the brass brush that is doing most of the heavy lifting, because you'll see here, after a quick pass with the brush, we see more steel sections exposed on the blade, so maybe that is what's doing most of the work. It'll be interesting to test on the other side of the blade and see what happens. What's interesting here is we can see a little more clearly the maker's mark I mentioned in the first cleaning of the video. You'll see it looks like a J or something similar. So I don't think there's any way to decipher what this is, but it's most definitely a mark. Anyway, I'll keep working on this blade, clean up this side, and then I'll either get back to you with this side done and the other to do, or once the whole blade is cleaned up. But you kind of get an idea of what the process is. And through the magic of editing, we have an update on the state of this blade. So what I've done on this side in the last few days has been work only with friction methods, basically. So essentially, I've tried a whole bunch of different combinations of friction cleaning. So both with and without autosol, cleaning often versus just rubbing like for hours. And this has taken, I would say, maybe a couple of hours a day, perhaps, for about 5 days. So let's say between 7 and 10 hours. And I would say that you can definitely see results. So if we compare it to this side, which has not been touched, this is what we were left with immediately after the process of using decorroder. So it was kind of clean of corrosion. You could start seeing a little bit of the steel underneath here, but it was overall very matte and aged. What we're looking at now is a blade that's starting to show its steel. Actually, I would say it's well on the way. It's about halfway there probably in terms of areas that are kind of patinated versus areas that show live steel. Of course, with all of these processes, it's really a matter of case by case, figuring out what you think is appropriate for a certain sword. So this one being and the other ones I have as well, being the case that they were in such horrible condition, I feel pretty comfortable cleaning them as far as is reasonably possible without really kind of digging into the actual steel. With a sword that is in perhaps better condition or has higher value or is more special, I would obviously perhaps not even go to this limit. But I think I'll continue working on this. So this is just a quick update, but one thing that's really interesting here is you can now see the mark here, which, as I'm told, is an armory mark. So, I mean, I guess it's up to you, in your opinion, what each one of you thinks looks better or how the process is proceeding, but this is just to let you know that things are continuing. The next step I want to do, well, of course, I will be trying to equalize the two sides of the blade, of course. I want this one to be in a similar condition to the other. And then I'm going to try the decorroder again. So what I want to see is if perhaps now that there is more steel exposed, decorroder is going to work more. Or maybe it's reached its limit, like maybe this will not be removed from decorroder. So it's something that we're going to have to see. I want to, of course, equalize them because I don't want to apply decorroder to two differentially treated sides of the blade and then have essentially a two-face blade for the rest of eternity. So that is going to be the next step. I hope this was interesting to watch, and I hope you tune in to see what happens next in a few weeks once I have the time to remove this and then get the decorroder on. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon in another sword video. Bye.